So I do believe America is facing an extreme problem. And I've chucked it up to three that I felt are the most problematic. Um, and at the same time, this also made me think about America as a whole and where I see it going, but also the history, trying to keep in acknowledgement the history as well. It's been a while since I've posted on here, and there's good reason for that. I struggled with the direction I really want this channel to go, this podcast to go, and I started to think about the reason I actually started this in the first place, and it was originally for mental health, and then I was like, well, I feel like that's a problem, but I feel like that's not a bigger problem. And then I focused it more on critical thinking. I felt like critical thinking was a skill that wasn't being exercised properly or recommended or encouraged, and it was kind of being put at the back burner because emotional rhetoric was starting, or is, in my opinion, how a lot of people convey messages nowadays. Um, Slogans now to some degree replace an actual argument. That to me is insane, but that is kind of where we are. There's not too much actual arguments being made, and there are a lot more just slogans being thrown out. But that takes me to what I believe the the three biggest issues are in America. I think the first one is, and I think this is the most critical, I think it's a lack of purpose and meaning. Um, and I think a lot of Americans, uh, they can't find a compelling answer for the question, what am I alive for? And I think that's extremely important. And I think the second one is trust in I would say the erosion of trust in general. I think a lot of people don't trust the government. They don't trust the police. They don't trust certain agencies, schools, each other. I think this has become such I would say phenomena, but I would say it's become such a culture now to not trust the government, to not trust police, scientists, elections, all these things. We've heard through many times, throughout many presidents, the elections are rigged and blah, blah, blah. And I'm sure they probably are. I'm not going to be naive and say, like, I'm sure some weird stuff hasn't happened. Do I think it's like that all the time? I don't know. I really can't give you an answer because I don't know. But that's the second one. And I think the last one is either the decline or lack thereof of personal responsibility. Um, and I think those three categories are extremely important. And I do want to explain why I feel these are the biggest three things, because I think stuff like politics and the economy and the national debt and all this other shenanigans that we complain about, I think they are encapsulated into this entire picture, right? And the reason I talk about the lack of personal responsibility primarily is because it's extremely controversial, and I think identity politics primarily plays an extremely important role into this, because a lot of people are being judged by their group and not by the individual. So everything that you do, you're assigned to it by the group that you are in. We see this with LGBT. We see this with liberals, conservatives, Republicans. The extremists on both sides. I think a healthy society, in my opinion, I think it relies on many things. I think raising your children well is one, keeping your word, admitting when you made a mistake, admitting when you it did something intentionally wrong, because a mistake and doing something intentionally wrong are not the same thing. And I think that's important. Working hard, being honest when no one is watching, that's extremely difficult, because you have to keep your word even when no one is around. That is a hard thing to do. Like, that's not easy for anybody, but I think modern culture now, and this is just my opinion, and feel free to explain how you want to explain it, but I do believe modern culture now often encourages people to explain themselves primarily through external forces: politics, upbringing, algorithms, capitalism, privilege, oppression. Like, all of these these influences are real, right? And they matter a great deal. But when it becomes the only lens people can begin to see themselves as, and I guess you could call it the victimhood mentality, you hold yourself back, and you hold your community back. That is I think that is, maybe that might be number one for me. I don't know. I'll teeter on that, but I do think a lack of purpose and meaning are important. But personal responsibility does not. I don't. What does it mean? I think it means, given my circumstances, what is the next right thing I can do? I think that's it. I think that is, in my opinion, the right way to look at personal responsibility in its entirety. And the reason I really think these are important, and I kind of want to focus on. I want to focus on the lack of purpose and the lack of meaning. I think, and I guess even my experience might help you guys really understand this. Will help you understand the point I'm trying to make, right? I think my experience can be a good example as for how I really want you guys to understand the point that I'm trying to put forward to you. So, when I put God first and focused on something bigger than myself, it was one of the best feelings I ever had. I was waking up at 4 a.m. to go to the gym. I was meal prepping. I was eating breakfast. I was eating mid-snacks. There was so much more responsibility in my day, but I've never felt more alive. And when that started to slack off, I got into this hole. I started thinking about myself. I started thinking about how I can make myself initially better, and not not the world around me. That became extremely problematic, because I started to really sit and think, like, dude, I was so good. Last month, the last 2 months I was going to the gym. I was eating. I was doing the things I wanted to do, that I set forth. But it wasn't about me. I was doing this because I wanted to better my family. I wanted to better my relationship. There was so many things I wanted to do, that I wanted to better, that it inadvertently forced me to work on myself so I can help those around me. And that helped me a great deal feel way less anxious. It made me feel more enthusiastic. I felt I had more energy. I was less tired. I was also eating healthy. I wasn't eating junk. I wasn't spending money on crap stuff. And then there was a period after that where it fell off, and I started to put myself first again. But think about that, right? Think about that. Seriously, sit with that and think about that. Like, if you in your life, think about a time where you were doing something else for someone else, or your family, and how much better you felt doing that. That's not nothing. That's not just like, oh, well, it was that time because I was helping my family. No, it's doing that action. It's putting yourself, not necessarily last, because you're not forgetting yourself, but you're doing something that's bigger than just serving you. You're serving people you love. You're you're doing all these things, and in order to do that, what did you have to do? You had to get up out of bed. You had to plan all these things for your sister's birthday party or your mother's surprise birthday party. You had to get up and start, doing all, like, think of how much you made yourself better so you can make the people around you better. That to me is something that I absolutely see missing today, because people just focus on me, 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 me. I need to get this college degree. I need to feel independent. I had to work on my X, Y, and Z. Like, there's so much in that I don't feel like we are taking serious. I don't feel like it's looked at in a way where it's an actual crisis that we are facing as a country, being in America. And I guess one of the ways I was looking at this, I listened to somebody talk about this, and they were like, well, imagine you have two people working the exact same difficult job, right? Like, person John says, I'm only here to get a paycheck, right? And every inconvenience to them feels meaningless. Every annoying coworker feels like they are just like, oh God, I got to get over this person. Like, they became like an obstacle, like something in the way. And it was just like every Monday would feel, and we've all been there. Like, every Monday feels like shit, right? Like, excuse me. And then you did have that coworker who came in, and whether it was like, typically for me, it was like a mom or a dad who would be at work, and their kind of mindset was, well, this job helps me for my family. And it wasn't about them, but they were some of the happiest people who you saw coming to work. That doesn't mean they didn't sit in silence and cry sometimes, because life is tough. It is. Life is not easy. It's not meant to be easy. By no stretch of the means is life meant to be easy. That is, I don't think in any world that your life should be easy. I think it should be meaningful, and I think you should have a purpose for it. But I think the work itself may not be more enjoyable for like the mom and dad, but the struggle, the suffering, the getting up at the ass crack of dawn, it has a purpose to it. For the mom and dad. For the other person, well, I mean, it has a purpose, but it's just the way they look at it is, I'm just trying to get a paycheck, and I think this is a fundamental issue with America today, and it's becoming a culture that I'm struggling to see we can recover from, if I'm being completely honest. And I don't know if there's a way to kind of come back from it. I think this is going to be a trend for a while, and I think we're probably, and I could be wrong, but I feel like we're probably in that period of, like, America has always progressed upward, but there were dips. I think we're in that dip part, and I think our generation and the next generation after are going to experience this, and this may go on for a century or two. Who knows? But America has always bounced back, and America has always overcame many difficult atrocities across the board. But I think this the purpose and the meaning, to me, is one of the most important things that we, in my opinion, that's missing. I think it's in a crisis, if I'm being honest. And I don't know what work people can do. I don't know how to even start. I don't know how I started that moment I was explaining earlier, where I was going to the gym, waking up all, there was something that just awakened in me, and I would pray sometimes, and maybe I like to I love to believe that it was God who kind of gave me that courage and that strength to get up and tie my shoes and fix the bed and do all those things. But that's what I believe, and for the lack of purpose. Now, kind of going into the erosion of trust, I think this one is kind of extremely self-evident. Um, Politicians lie a lot. Everybody lies, but I think the way it's done through politics, in my opinion, is very abhorrent. It is extremely dangerous and careless, because we've seen things like political violence being on the rise, and we've also seen it become justified to a degree. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that. And a lot of people may not see this as a problem. And if you get your news from like TikTok or like, you know, I hate to say this, but there are news stations out there that are extremely biased. Extremely biased. If you watch Fox News, 9 times out of 10, they are sitting on a Republican or a conservative's lap. If you watch ABC, listen, if we could just be honest about that, we'll move a lot far in this discussion. But that is trust is a primary thing that a lot of people, in my opinion, essentially struggled with a lot. Like, we stopped trusting the government. We stopped trusting science. We stopped trusting politicians. We stopped trusting the police, the media, universities, all of these things, and some distrust is justified, and I do believe a lot of these institutions do fail by and large, but I don't think the entirety of it is just untrustworthy, because I do believe there are some great people, good, honest people who are trying to make a better life for Americans on both sides of the political spectrum. And I'm not talking about the extremes. I'm not talking about the KKK or the far left or the far right. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the good, sensible people who have a good understanding of how the world works. But think about this. Without trust, cooperation is not something that is sought out, right? You think about how disagreements become like existential crisis to the other group. All these things play an extremely, extremely important role, and I think that is absolutely another big thing, because if we don't trust the government and trust these politicians, who do we go to? Right? Like, no, but think about that. Like, who do you go to? Who do you rely on for something, like for information? Who do you rely on for anything? If you are now at a point where, well, I don't trust any Republican or any Democrat or any politician, and I have my disdain with politics, but a country can survive slavery. They can survive economic hardships. It is much harder for a country to thrive when citizens don't trust the major institutions. And you take that with as much salt as you need. But it is a problem. And I believe the final one, the lack of responsibility, this may be the most controversial one, because I believe identity politics kind of falls into this category, into this specific. And listen, sit with me through this, because I think this is extremely important, and I need you guys to sit through this one, please. I believe this is extremely controversial. I really do. But identity politics are probably the worst thing that you can see anywhere, and that is judging an individual by the group that you associate them with. the issue with that is, well, if you associate someone with a group and they don't explicitly come out and say that they are part of a specific group, but you paint them as this person, or this, you paint them or associate them with a particular group, well, you take away all individual responsibility. Why is that a problem? Well, let's just say, and this is also controversial, let's just say there's two Christians, there's two Christians sitting at a bar, right? One is extremely obnoxious, very foul, very nasty to people who aren't Christian, so to say, and they are extremely hypocritical, which everyone is hypocritical. But let's say this person isn't living up to the Christian value, but they consider themselves a Christian. Now, let's say the other Christian, right? Let's say they do all Christian things like. So you have one Christian who practices and abides by Christian demands, and you have another one that does not. Now, if you tell me that because I'm Christian, and this dirtbag of a Christian over here, it considers himself a Christian, that now he paints the entire picture for what Christians or Christianity is supposed to be like. The issue with that logic is that you can apply that to any group. So if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, and there's somebody out there that goes in, either harasses or kills someone because they don't agree with their beliefs, now I'm attributing this person or to this group, but now I'm painting the entire group as this. And this is the issue, right? Because when you do that, there are so many rabbit holes you can go down. And the reason this is also problematic, by and large, is because you justify extreme measures for the sake of, humanity or democracy. And I think that is extremely dangerous. I think this is extremely controversial because people assume that, well, if I belong to this group, then my group is moral and my group is justified to do whatever because we're doing it in the name of morality. And that is like extremely dangerous, because now who decides who's moral or not within that group? But what happens when someone in your group goes out of the line or out of bounds and does something extreme? Now is that justified because it's that group? This is why I don't believe in identity politics in its entirety, because it also takes away from the individual responsibility. And this is by far, to me, one of the major factors in personal accountability and responsibility. But I think modern culture encourages people to explain themselves primarily through external lenses. So whether it's your politics, your upbringing, your social media, your algorithm, your TikToks, your capitalism or oppression, trauma, all this stuff. And those influences are real. That's not fake. Like, people experience these things. People experience oppression. But when they become the only lens that you see yourself through, people begin to see themselves mainly as, I would say, people will see themselves mainly as products of circumstances rather than agents of making meaningful choices. So, and you may ask why that's important. Well, personal responsibility doesn't mean every outcome is your fault. And I need to make that clear. Personal responsibility does not mean every outcome is your fault. All it means is asking, I would say a good way of putting this is like, okay, given my circumstances, what is the next right thing I can do? I think that's extremely fair. I think that's a very fair acknowledgement, and I would say lens to look through. And I think without that mindset, no policy can reliably fix any society, like at all, like at all. But this is why I find these things to be the most important, and the three most important things. And some people may disagree with this, and I really don't care. But I really just want you guys to think about this, and let me know what you guys think, and if you feel like there's hope or light at the end of this tunnel that I feel like we're going down. And I don't know how we recover from this, to be honest. I don't know if there is a way to recover, because people have to be willing to learn how to shut up and I mean, like, learn how to actually just shut up and listen. Shut up and listen. Shut up and assume that the person you're talking to is actually right about something. Like, assume that you're wrong and they're right. That will save you a lot of time. It really would. It really would save you a lot of time. But that's all I got for you guys today. And I know it's been a while, but again, like I said, I was really struggling with the direction I wanted this channel to go. But I think something approximating this conversation is the direction I really want this to go. So we'll see. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. If you did, I don't, I care, but I hope you take something from this. I sincerely do. So thank you for your attention. If you watch this, I genuinely appreciate it. And leave your comments, like the video if you found it useful, and share it. But that's all I got. So thank you guys, and